All right, thank you all for joining Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC show. So today we're hanging out with Kevin Hart of Haven IAQ. Kevin, how's it going today?
It's going well, Clifton. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Kevin, you are the founder and the CEO of Haven IAQ.
Yes, I am. I like to introduce myself as Kevin Hart, the Canadian, not the Canadian.
There you go.
But I started off as an electrician, actually.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, and then transitioned into business and entrepreneurship and went down a 10-year journey of learning how to build a company.
Absolutely. That's quite the journey, isn't it? A lot to learn in doing that.
It's been a roller coaster. Yeah. If you like late nights and lots of learning, this is for you.
Lots of hours of commitment, but for all of the right reasons. So we're here today to talk a little bit about IAQ, and you have really come to the forefront in understanding and controlling IAQ. So tell me a little bit about how you got into the air quality side of our industry.
Yeah, that was actually, so as an electrician, we would be on work sites and we'd be wearing respirators with these big purple cartridges to filter out these crystalline silica dust in the air, and that's carcinogenic. So you don't want to breathe that. You don't want cancer. So we would have safety meetings every Thursday over lunchtime, and they would just tell us how dangerous the particles in the air are for us. But as soon as they would drill this concrete dust, within 60 seconds, it would be invisible. And so you just take the mask off and, but you're in a confined space. It's still there. It's
go on about your work.
Invisible.
Great.
So really, that was the light bulb moment of, we care about the water quality, the food quality, but we really haven't connected. Most people haven't connected. The light bulb hasn't turned on about, hey, the air we breathe makes a difference. So that set me down this journey of, is there a way to monitor and detect these particulates in the air that are harming us? And that created this 10-year rabbit hole of, hey, there's much more to indoor air quality than just, particles. There's chemicals, there's, mold, there's all these different contaminants that we're breathing in.
Sure, absolutely. One of my first encounters in the industry of not recognizing exactly what these chemicals were is, I started out in a small family-owned refrigeration and HVAC. So we did residential and commercial HVAC. And I can remember Bob Torrance, which is the owner of our company, he's having some respiration issues. And he's like, it's part of working in crawl spaces and attics. And it wasn't until later, until I became a little bit more educated with the circumstances that we do work around, the environments that we're in all the time, that we paid a little bit more attention to it. And now you're like at the cusp of the time to be involved with air quality. I'm in the Midwest, and we've had a significant amount of smoke due to the wildfires that we've had up in the northern part of our country. So you've sent some photos out. I've seen some social media links that had some pictures in your area. That's very much what it's like here. People are starting to pay more attention to air quality, not just on their indoor environment, but the outdoor environment. And that's where you really shine, as you come into understanding what that environment looks like.
Yeah. Just one thing to say about that. The reason why we chose the space we did in residential is we spend over 60% of our time in our homes.
Think about that. Yeah, absolutely.
Think about that. And most of our homes weren't built with health in mind,
right?
From the point of construction. And so when they say there's a forest fire, get inside, get in your home. Well, do we know that
What's
that's actually our home is protecting us?
Right. Well, I've got a little video I'm going to throw up here. I'm going to put you and I down in the bottom for a second, and we'll just share this real quick before we dive into the presentation.
Comfortable, clean, safe. That's how your home should feel. Living in a home with poor air quality can challenge your immune and respiratory system, mental health, and productivity. Air quality has 3 pillars: filtration, ventilation, and humidity control. Your filtration system helps capture airborne particles on a whole home scale. Unlike air purifiers, which only service one room at a time, proper ventilation replaces stale air with new outdoor air, removing any built-up chemicals from off-gassing and CO2 from breathing. Older homes weren't built to keep poor quality air from coming in, and newer homes' tight building envelopes make ventilation so important, though it's often neglected. Humidity control creates a comfortable and safe environment, while preventing mold growth and damage to your home's structure and furnishings. The foundation of your home's air quality is airflow. Without airflow, the equipment that manages these three pillars can't function. With a professionally installed and maintained smart system, you'll have peace of mind that your home's air quality is healthy, safe, and meeting the needs of your family throughout the year. That's why we created Haven. The Haven Central Air Monitor is installed in your family's forced air system by your trusted technician. It tracks the comfort of your indoor environment while scanning for unhealthy particles and chemicals. When paired with the central air controller or a smart thermostat, the monitor sends a message to activate your HVAC equipment automatically, ensuring proper filtration, ventilation, and humidity control of your air for optimal home health. This innovative solution is compatible with most forced air systems, using Wi-Fi to add smart capabilities to your existing equipment. Transform your HVAC system into the best air cleaning system, invisible and integrated, and it's all easily accessible through your smartphone. With Haven's automation, you can carry on with your everyday activities and breathe better, knowing Haven is caring for your health. Let's turn your home into a haven.
Okay, I know for myself growing up in the industry that, I was taught to be an air conditioning technician, right? What does that actually mean? We were taught to troubleshoot equipment and become technicians and have solutions for equipment that wasn't running properly or maybe not running at all. But when we get into IAQ, indoor air quality, now we become a new type of technician. So one of the reasons I wanted us to talk about this was as educators, as we are bringing up our next generation of technicians, it's very important to educate on what we are doing for the quality of air, just not the quality of the equipment that we're working on. So I'm looking forward to this, and I'll give you the reins, and let's just dive into IAQ a little bit deeper and bring us a better understanding of this piece of a technician's role and responsibility that they may not have been as comfortable with in the past.
Yeah, thanks, Clifton. And just to riff off what you just said, I've really come to the conclusion that one of the main obstacles for IAQ is that the technician and the aptitude of the technician getting into the trade is they're a problem solver.
That's right.
They diagnose the issue and they solve it, and they offer a service to the homeowner,
a solution,
which is a wanted service. And I think one of the main issues today with the way IAQ is approached is it either isn't approached or it's approached as a sales tactic.
Right. Not as the solution that it actually is.
Exactly. And a lot of these technicians don't want to be salespeople.
Sure.
That's not why they got into the trade. And so I think there's a big disconnect between the owners of the company who might attend an event like this and get amped up about IAQ and then create some sort of commission structure for, the more of these things you sell, the more, pay you're going to get. I think there's just a disconnect. Between
absolutely there is
that whole function.
Yeah. So it comes down to better education of, what air quality really is.
Exactly. So today we'll go through a couple of things, 3 things specifically. So just an introduction to what these 3 pillars are, why you should care. I see a lot of similar presentations to the one I'm giving. I want to go a little bit deeper into why you should care, because I don't feel like that is often talked about. Number 2, how it relates to HVAC. So how do we actually solve these problems? And a big part of a solution is not just the equipment, but the controls. And that's an area where in residential, we don't see that the intelligence of a building automation or management system has been brought into residential. And that's one of the things we're excited. And I know you're excited by.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's what actually got me back into residential. So I was in building automation. So I was a mobile engineer. So I did refrigeration, HVAC, I did the electrical, I did energy monitoring. And a big part of that was understanding the quality and the efficiency of the environment. And when we started migrating these controls into residential, that was what opened up my opportunity to get involved with the residential side, because we've been doing this in the commercial and industrial environments for a long time. It's just now becoming popular in the residential industry.
Yeah, there's some really obvious, logical, automations that exist in a commercial building that you sort of scratch your head and go, in a home, the thermostat is hot and cold. It's dry bulb, it's sensible, it's an on and off switch. It's like having an accelerator, but just having no control over any of the other parameters in the home.
Exactly. And a lot of people just aren't informed of what that thermostat is doing. They assume that it's doing work, but a lot of times, even if it's a digital thermostat, it is typically just switches. And until we get into communicating systems, but a lot of our legacy systems really aren't doing as much work as we would think that they are.
Yeah. All right. And then the last one is monitoring IAQ. Why should you do it? Why should you bother? And we'll layer in some of the controls if we have time.
Sure.
So we'll hopefully touch on all these 3 things today. And I would say, just you set this up nicely. The time is now. There's emergency. What have we had? We've had pandemics, airborne viruses. How can we get back in control? And how could the buildings we live in maybe be the masks that aren't so comfortable to wear? How could they protect our health and exchange the air and do these functions for us? And then you see flooding and you see mold and you see a lot of restoration companies coming in, as well as just the whole Southeast being covered in mold as a result of the high humidity.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
As well as forest fires that, I'm on the West Coast, I'm in Canada and Vancouver, and all the way down to California, we've gotten wildfires pretty bad. But I think this is the first year. I was just in Wisconsin and Illinois last week and took some of those photos you saw on our social media channel. But I mean, now everyone really,
people are more aware now.
To it.
Right. So every person has either encountered or has very close firsthand or secondhand experience with all 3 of these within the last few years. So the consumer is much more aware of the impact that is in their structure than what they were, say, 5 years ago.
Yeah. And that's really, first of all, what we stand for as a company is turning homes into these safe havens, because our buildings and equipment should protect our health.
Absolutely.
And we're raising families, and there's children, and there's people with, sensitivities, and they have immune systems that are compromised. So this is important to a lot of people. And like you said, awareness is at an all-time high. So now, the one thing I'm totally certain about, more than ever, is that you or your team, and these are speaking to the audience here, you're going to find yourself in a discussion with your customers about indoor air quality.
Yes.
So my question is, are you prepared?
Right.
Are you choosing to see that is an opportunity to take care of your customers, to be the stewards and the custodians of their air, of their home, of their comfort, to be an expert that they trust and rely on for the comfort and safety of their family, and to win quotes over your competition? Or do you simply see it as an area of responsibility that you sort of never signed up for, never agreed to, maybe even a liability that you don't want as part of your company? And we could definitely go down the rabbit hole of how tough, this job is right now. It is a very tough job to be in heating and cooling right now, between the extreme temperatures that technicians face, as well as the talent shortages. I know people are working 17, 18-hour days right now.
Pretty rough.
Refrigerant changeover, having to learn a lot, and private equity consolidation, and on and on and on. It's not an easy job.
No.
So you'd be justified. But I have a feeling that the type of person who showed up to this webcast is the type of person who clicked into this webinar because they don't hold that perspective.
That's right.
That this is a liability.
They want to know more. They want to understand, the things that they can do to make an impact in people's lives, not just in equipment, not just in efficiency and comfort, but in quality.
Yeah. So let's dive into IAQ and how this can actually work for you and your company. And we see that it's 3 things. It's the 3 pillars, which is filtration, ventilation, and humidity control. Now, I've seen different versions of these pillars where people put 4 or 5 different pillars here. But really, when you consolidate some of those pillars, these are fundamentally what they are, and they rest on the foundation of airflow. So as we were saying, the circulation, the equipment being on. If you think about filtration, you can't filter if the air is not moving through the filter. You can't humidify or dehumidify if the system's off.
Right.
And you can't move air in and out without moving the air. So fundamentally, we see that airflow is the foundation of air quality. If the air is stagnant, something called sick building syndrome.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So these are the pillars that we'll go into subsequently here in these slides. And yeah, I see a few comments that indoor humidity has to be the first factor. Yeah, indoor humidity. It didn't hit me in the beginning. I was all about particulates. They're the physical things getting into your lungs, and absolutely, particulates are shown to be one of the worst in terms of impact to human health. But actually, humidity makes filtration and ventilation so much harder. From mold spores and the inability, even the volatile organic compounds will off gas at a higher rate depending on the humidity level. So humidity is really important. So one word of caution before I jump in here.
Okay.
There's a way of explaining the approach that we would recommend, and sort of as a word of caution. It's to avoid the world of chemistry. You do not want to become a chemist of the air in your customers' homes. Instead, what we found to be effective is to be a mathematician.
There we go.
And that is, instead of the complicated scientific world of the periodic table of elements, we propose the simple work of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Clean air often comes down to removing unwanted contaminants or components of the air that aren't beneficial to human health, and in some cases, adding humidity and adding some factors that are missing from the air. Now, be very careful with the approach of using electronic means to zap, shine, and manipulate the molecules of your customer's air. And I'm not saying that these technologies are all snake oil or are all ineffective. I'm saying that we have decades of evidence of what is most probably going to work versus technologies that are, in some cases, inconclusive and have produced mixed results. And one of the biggest factors here that steers us away from these technologies at Haven is the ability to do harm. Simply put, some of the changes these products make to the air, while there may be a primary effect that is desired and is in the marketing material,
could have a secondary effect.
It's the second and third order effects that create unintended consequences. And we're only starting to understand those because they require millions and millions of dollars.
Lots of research.
Of equipment and research
to
really understand these. One example I have that I really like, it's actually from a book called Healthy Buildings by Joe Allen from Harvard, is that a chemical called limonene, that is the lemon scent that is common in all of our homes and cleaners, when interacting with ozone, even small amounts of ozone, creates as a second order effect formaldehyde. And formaldehyde is one of the most toxic chemicals for human health.
That is very interesting.
So just an example of, ozone, one could argue, is okay in small quantities, although I've heard counter arguments that it's not. And the lemon scent is on its own fairly harmless. But when the two interact, you're doing chemistry. You're doing unintended chemistry in your customers' homes that could do harm. We want to avoid that.
Had a question come in here from Mr. Paul Michael Onder. We'll bring that up probably here in just a little bit when we start talking about humidity systems for air quality.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get to that. All right. And this is just a series of things before we get to the meat here is your climate zone. Not all climate zones are the same. And so your solutions are going to differ and your problems are going to differ per climate zone. And this is a map of America. And I also get that not everybody on this call might be from America. In fact, some of us are from Canada.
Yeah.
But I mean, fundamentally, we have moist climates, dry climates.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can see an analog here. But really the way this climate zone map is laid out is that the numbers 1 and up to 7 are, think about it from south to north. And that's more about the temperature. That's more about it's going to be hotter in a 1 and colder in a 7. And then you can think about ABC going from east to west, being A is your moist climate, B is your dry climate, and C is your marine climate. And this is all fascinating. Like actually the split line between your moist and dry climate, it is really interesting. There's certain videos that cover this. There's essentially a line down the country whereby everything east of that line is moist and everything west of that line is dry.
I have to come back to that. That's fascinating.
It is, and it turns out 80% of the population lives in climate zone A.
I've heard that before. Yeah, I've seen that, but I didn't think very much about the border being so distinct. But yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, okay. It is a quite distinct border. And so there aren't a lot of people living in the dry climate zone because it's harder to survive there. There's a lot of population on the West Coast, a lot in climate zone A, not a lot in climate zone B there. Very fascinating stuff.
And out of curiosity, for everyone joining in, let us know in the chat where you're chiming in from. This is the community of HVAC. We are all here for the same reasons, and we are glad that you're with us. So let us know where you're chiming in.
Yeah, and I hope people see the connection from climate zone to IAQ here. And if not, here's really the punchline is in climate zone A, you're going to be dealing with different issues. Often insufficient ventilation, excess moisture, condensate clogging, and lower air velocities, because the amount of CFM per ton the unit's moving is typically dialed back in the case of air conditioning to get more of the latent load. Insufficient moisture in the dry climate zones means you're going to be humidifying. Ventilation issues could just be that it's often very hot in certain places, and then you're bringing in dry air. And you got combustion in some of the northern climates. So now you got to deal with the combustion gases, which becomes a risk to the IAQ. Interestingly, in some of the marine and in particular in the Northwest here, you get just low run times. There's often it's not hot enough for air conditioning. And so you might have 3-4 months of the year where your system's just not turning on at all. So you're not getting any IAQ, any filtration, or any ventilation. And you get more forest fires typically on this side. Oh, and I see some fellow Canadians in the chat here.
Yeah, absolutely.
As
Fort
well
McMurray?
As Michigan, which you're probably in the forest fires or were recently. All right. So let's go into the first pillar.
Okay.
This is filtration. So what problem should it solve? Particulate matter.
Particulate.
This was the first one I became familiar with, PM 2.5. So
yes. Can you explain that a little bit? Because a lot of people are confused with the PM 2.5 and the PM 5.0 and what these actually represent.
Yeah, first of all, I like to think about particulates as everything physical in the air. So think about it like if you moved all the air in your home through a filter, that stuff left over on the filter, that's the physical stuff. Those are the particles that you'd be capturing when it goes from white to a black filter, gray filter. Those are the particulates in the air. So gases are going to pass right through that filter because they're not physical. They're not something you can capture. And so
sure.
PM 2.5, that is the 2.5 micron being a very small size, maybe around the diameter of a hair on your head. And so these are very small. Often you can't see these.
Sure.
With your eyes, sometimes you're in like a movie theater and the projector is projecting light in a dark room.
Hey, what's that floating around?
All the dust floating in the air that when the lights go on, you can't see it anymore. So those are typically more like PM 10 micron particles. You get things like dander, pet dander, for example, pollen. These are between 10 to 100 microns. But the reason we care about 2.5 microns is the size, the diameter, the aerodynamic diameter of that particle is so small that actually it's like a ninja. It gets through your cilia of your nose and it gets through all the obstructions of the airway into your lungs and into the alveoli and into the bloodstream at a certain point. And particularly as this gets smaller into submicron, which is less than 1 micron of size, these are actually getting into your bloodstream, which means they're getting into your organs.
Wow.
And we've found particulates that end up in the brain, into the fetus, and are doing severe damage to people, to humans. And so this is sort of the most obvious dangerous air pollutant because it's like physically infiltrating your body and doing harm to your organs. Any other questions about that?
Yeah, and anyone out here in the chat that has questions, please hop in along the way. We're here for you. This is all educational opportunity, and we want to help clarify things along the way. Because that 2.5 is one that even took me a little bit to dive deeper into it and realizing that it's a very, I'd say, becoming very popular measurement amongst, air monitoring.
Yep. It's in terms of sources, cooking is one of the sources. So as the food cooks, you get very fine, basically explosions. The oil's exploding, the food is burning, and you're getting combustion, right? And that combustion, it aerosolizes very fine particulates that actually end up being some of the smaller, less than 2.5 even submicron particles that you breathe. Now, luckily, people typically aren't cooking 24/7, so we call these acute events, in that the actual event probably lasts for an hour. Yeah. On the other hand, you have chronic events, which would be like an ongoing wildfire, something that persists for a long period of time. But the cooking, fumes and breathing them in, not the fumes, sorry, but the particulates as a result of combustion, actually are not good to breathe and are quite harmful to people. And it also matters what cooking oils you use.
I can imagine.
Burning points.
Yeah.
And the heat that you're using, et cetera. There's alternatives to cooking on a frying pan, like using a sous vide machine, et cetera. Dusting and vacuuming. Now, we're typically now seeing larger particles, right? Because these aren't combusted particles. They're not tiny, tiny particles, but they're going to be the larger ones that they've fallen to the ground. Particles, gravity affects them, so eventually they will settle. The smaller they are, the longer they'll just float on the currents in the air.
Sure.
We've even heard about the wildfire smoke, which again is combustion. They're small particles going over the ocean and over an airstream and then landing in Europe and other.
Isn't that crazy?
Continents. Yeah, completely crazy. But look at the Canadian wildfires landing down in Wisconsin and Illinois.
Oh yeah, we had a severe driving condition alert just a week or so ago, where we had quarter-mile visibility just due to smoke. I mean, you would have thought it was in the the yard next to you, but it was not. It was just finally hitting at lower pressure where it was able to drop down closer to the ground.
Right. Yeah, and obviously the particles in the air, they obstruct the visibility of the air, because you're really looking through billions of particles over a long enough distance, like kilometers or miles. And so at some point, you can't see the mountains anymore. If you have mountains, you can't see far away landscape. And that's an indication that the air quality is not good. But there's also apps that you can use to look at the air quality index. And fun fact, when you look at the sunset, during a forest fire and the sun's really red, like it looks like you're on Mars, that's the light refracting off those particles at a certain angle when the sun's low in the horizon. That produces a red wavelength. So that's another indication that there's a lot of particles in the air.
Yeah, absolutely.
So wildfire smoke we touched on. Now, what are the health impacts? So this is exacerbating, triggering asthma, eye, nose, throat irritation. I mean, a lot of people are now familiar with the effects of wildfires, and different people have different sensitivities, right? Like I'm in a biking group, and there's certain people who they'll bike at 50 micrograms per cubic meter of PM 2.5. And there's, people who after about 10, a fifth of that are already feeling it.
Interesting. So they're actually measuring it for riding and endurance.
Yeah, they're actually, it is such a common thing now that people look at the air quality index and what the levels are and kind of know what their own personal, sensitivity is at different levels.
Well, a lot of people don't realize how common it is around the world to look at IAQ daily. Here in the US, we don't utilize monitors in most homes, but you go abroad, especially when you get into Asia, it's very common to find home monitoring systems measuring the outdoor air quality and the indoor air quality just to help judge what your day is. So it's something that we're going to see more of here in the US, particularly, especially with, some of these events that we've seen recently.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I mean, you see that a lot in China because their PM 2.5 on a normal day is more like what we would see during a forest fire in some cases, but even Japan can have bad air quality. And so there's a company called Daikin that some of you might be familiar with, Japanese company. Yeah. They've come to North America. Well, they're sponsoring on your local weather station, they're sponsoring a segment which goes through your air quality every single morning, to try to imitate what they're doing over there in Japan and China over here to raise awareness about indoor air quality. So it's slowly coming in.
Well, I've wondered about that. So I was a Daikin TSA, so I spent a lot of time with Daikin equipment. That's where I first recognized your controls. With the Daikin One Home Air Monitoring System, it's actually measuring all of these particulates. We're measuring VOCs. We're looking at the indoor air quality, and if you're connected to Wi-Fi, it's using the Daikin transmitting information so that it actually compares your local outdoor air quality. So on your thermostat, you're now looking at indoor air quality and outdoor air quality to compare the two of them. And that's the things that I see coming here to the US pretty quickly, hopefully.
Yeah. It's already here in many areas. So just to finish off this pillar, because we don't have a ton of time, cancer, respiratory, cardiovascular, that's one I didn't expect, but actually one of the largest human health effects isn't respiratory, it's actually cardiovascular. These particulates actually affect the cardiovascular system, into the vasculature, into the heart, into the arteries in the body. And so, and also just putting a tax on your immune system, making you more susceptible to ischemic heart disease and stroke events. And actually, they've shown that for every microgram of PM2.5 in the air, in terms of the concentration in the air, there's more emergency hospital visits, and there's a higher rate of ischemic heart disease events.
Interesting.
So direct correlation, from totally to the air quality going up to the rate of emergency visits to the hospital are directly correlated. That's
makes sense, though.
Fact. So what are the solutions we have? It's our filters in our central system. It's the room air purifiers, the sort of HEPA style filters, media air cabinets. So these are primarily, this is a problem of how do you move the air, like fundamentally, how do you move the most CFM through a highest grade filter possible to remove the most particulates from the air,
without creating too much external static pressure on a ducted system here in the Midwest, unfortunately.
Yes, exactly. And you know what, I've actually initially, I got complete rejection from the HVAC world about upgrading filters. It was, MERV 13, high static pressure, it's not going to work. And so, the first thing you see is that these media air cabinets, being often 5 inches in depth, have so much surface area to them that it creates or it doesn't create the level of static pressure you would see with your standard 1-inch filter.
Exactly.
And those are great. Now you can typically get up to MERV 13 with a nominal static pressure compared to 1-inch filter. But we see in some cases that there's just not a space in the sheet metal to put them.
Right.
In certain, you got these tight little closets in Florida and whatnot. The other approach we've seen is return grills. You've got all these return grills, and you can put filters in those return grills instead of the 1-inch
centralized filter. Sure.
Yeah, instead of the centralized, put it at the return grill. What's interesting is you can actually cut in a bigger return grill and a bigger filter than you would technically need. And that's going to further give you more surface area to get better filtration at a lower static pressure. So oversizing your return grills is another strategy we've seen. And in general, you can also create a transition up to a bigger media air cabinet or to a bigger filter slot than you actually need per the ductwork dimensions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So oversize it, transition up, transition down, and that's also going to give you more surface area for that filter. Also important is just making sure that that filter is gasketed, because those particulates, when they get to a certain size, they get real tricky. They're going to find any little escape to get around that filter. It doesn't like going through the filter because that filter has resistance. So they're going to find the path of least resistance. So if you haven't sealed around the filter and your ductwork isn't reasonably sealed, you're going to get escape around the filter.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we're starting to see a lot more add-on filtration systems, standalone filtration systems, giving that capability of doing a better filtering of the air within that space without adding a lot of restriction, because you're right. There's a lot of scenarios where we cannot add the filtration that the system needs. Unfortunately, a lot of systems are designed with a very limited ability to expand the filtration, which is sad because it could have been designed at installation to allow for better filtration. So it really takes a retraining of the brain. That's why it's important for us to talk about this for our educators. When we're teaching our shop, when we're teaching metal class, when we're teaching installation, very important to understand that 1-inch 16 by 25 filter that's been used for decades is not going to be the acceptable means of filtration going forward. We need to make sure that we're allowing for proper filtration on installation. And that's a little bit of a change. It takes a little bit of a retraining of the brain.
Yeah. And I don't think people want to change their filters every 90 days or 60 days. I think people prefer a once a year or a 6-month change with a more surface area filter.
Sure.
So I think there's multiple sort of reasons that you would recommend that solution as an upgrade. And to Todd's point in the chat, non-ducted system. I mean, this is why we built our products around central air systems. Is central air systems can be upgraded to manage the indoor air quality. I have not seen a mini split type unit that can handle any sort of proper filter that would improve the indoor air quality. I've also not seen a mini split type unit that can remove a good amount of moisture from the air, just in terms of look at the condensate lines. They're like a pencil. They're, look at what's dripping out of them. It's not removing a ton of moisture, and they're not providing any ventilation, right? There's no outdoor air coming into those mini split type units. So listen, mini split type units are brilliant at the sensible and the dry bulb. And, if you have a hot, like a frog, what is that? A room above the garage. There's certain situations where mini splits are great. And there's certain climate zones where mini splits make a lot of sense. But if you think that they're going to remove moisture, if you're in a humid climate zone or you're dealing with a family that has indoor air quality issues, you need to look at what is your strategy now if you're going with the mini split type unit to do the other components of indoor air quality.
Yeah, especially the dehumidification capability. You're right.
Yes. Okay. I think we can move to the next pillar of ventilation here. Just reading Todd's point here. Yeah, not a lot of education. Most people don't know they have a filter. Totally. I've also seen that people get upset when their filter is dirty because they think it's not doing its job.
Right.
That for some reason, clean air means that the filter shouldn't be getting dirty. They don't seem to make the connection that that's the thing that's, where the dirty air is going so that the air is clean. Listen, what I tell people is you have 2 filters in your home, the filter in your system and the filter in your lungs.
That's it. That's your 2 filtering capabilities.
Which one do you want to look dirty? But yeah, it's a challenge. Homeowner education is a challenge. So ventilation, what problem should it solve? So volatile organic compounds. Now that's a bunch of garble for most people. And the T there stands for total. So there's a ton of these volatiles. They're, just think about them like they're the majority of chemicals. They're sort of like the chemical soup in our home. It's the way I like to think about it. Now within those TVOCs are the specific chemicals like your formaldehyde or your benzene or your toluene, ethanol, so the TVOC comprises a lot of different chemicals, but it's sort of like a good measure of just how many, what is the chemical soup in your home?
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that new car smell may not be such a good thing after all, if you actually knew what that new car smell and that new home smell is. It's a release of chemicals that are decaying and that we are inhaling.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people stop there and are like, okay, yeah, that's doesn't seem good. But if you really go into the human health effects of this, you almost need a biology degree to really get into this world. And again, I would highly recommend reading the Healthy Buildings book by Joseph Allen, because he goes deeper into this. There's chapter 7, the global chemical experiment, where I've taken a lot of inspiration from. But he really goes into what are these chemicals? Where are they coming from? How are they regulated? How many have actually been removed from the market and banned, how many have actually even been tested? Out of like 50,000 chemicals in use, only like a few hundred have even been tested, and only like a dozen have been banned. And so we don't know. We're just playing this experiment with human health. And a lot of these chemicals, they're in our bedding, they're in our carpet, our paint, our drywall. There's some famous cases of this really doing harm to people, but it's there. And if you have good enough ventilation, maybe it doesn't matter. But one of the problems is that we're moving towards having tighter homes. And so if we have tight homes, and then we have this almost sounds like a conspiracy theory or wooey or something, but like all of the materials in our homes are off-gassing some chemicals at some rate. And if we don't have ventilation to remove those and replace that with fresh air, then we're breathing increasingly high levels of chemicals that, like flame retardants and other ones, will cause harm, will create cancer, will tax our immune system. And some of these create irreversible damage that can even be passed on from generation to generation. It's scary stuff.
Absolutely. No, I'm with you. When we think about air quality and we look at homes, construction of homes, we are absolutely moving towards tighter home construction. What does that do for the chemicals that are inside, especially as we start bringing in more man-made construction into our atmospheres? Lots of chemicals.
Yeah, and like this is me just sort of creating this us versus them scenario, but I kind of like, the feeling I get is that the government would like to see your most energy efficient air conditioner, which means that it's fully sensible load. So it's not removing any moisture, right? So we've got these really efficient air conditioners that aren't removing any moisture, while 80% of our population lives in a humid climate. So we're going to have these moldy homes. And on top of that, we also are building these really tight homes, again, for energy efficiency, so that we trap all that cold air and we don't have to keep air conditioning because we're not leaking any of that air conditioned air outside. And then in addition, we've also got these chemicals that are building up. So now we got mold and chemicals. I don't know. I think for human health, like, it's just such an afterthought for even where the regulations have headed so far. And I'm hoping that there's some silver lining to the pandemic, that I think we're starting to see people wake up to the types of issues that can cause.
Sure. So we're paying more attention now towards our air quality, and ventilation is definitely an important part of that.
Yeah. So what are the sources of TVOCs? So we got cleaning products, the off-gassing of furniture. If you open up a brand new product, from Amazon, you open up that bag and you just smell what, all the plastics and the off-gassing in there. Varnishes, glues, paints, and so on. And so what are the health impacts? Headaches, nausea, cancer, that's a pretty bad one, liver, kidney damage, and so on. Again, I can't do justice to ventilation. It's such a deep topic and it's so scientific. And we're going to learn some things and we're going to get better at communicating them. This is a lot scarier of a topic than I can even properly communicate.
Sure.
So what are the HVAC solutions we have? We've got energy recovery ventilators, heat recovery ventilators. I'll touch on that on the next slide. What is that for people who don't?
Sure. Yeah. No. Appreciate that.
And just outdoor dampers. So, we
fresh
probably
air?
have some fresh air, maybe a little PVC pipe of fresh air coming into the central system. But, some people will pipe a duct of fresh air, maybe a 6 or 8 inch duct, and that's operated by a motorized damper. And that's going to be able to bring in even more outdoor fresh air. And there's some pros and cons to that we can touch on here. So there's unintentional versus intentional ventilation. Obviously, ventilation is the movement between inside and outside. So what is the building envelope? First of all, this could get too building sciencey, and I'll try to stay away from that. But you have infiltration, which is air leaking into the home. And you can think about the home being under a negative pressure and sort of sucking air from the outside. And you might have hot air passing through a cold wall. And you got exfiltration, which is your home might be positively pressurized, and you've got air that is being pushed out of the home. So you might have cold air conditioned air pushing out into a hot climate outside. And you've got sort of intentional ventilation, which is controlled air leakage. This is intentional, right? And so that could be a bathroom exhaust fan. It could be your range hood fan above your kitchen. Those are pretty common types of ventilation that is more intentional. Cody, yes, this is live.
Yeah, I was going to say, thanks for joining us, Cody.
Awesome. Okay. So what is balanced ventilation? So we know that there's supply ventilation. That's like a bathroom exhaust fan because it's pushing out. If you have enough, if you have enough pushing out, like I know in America, there's, we like to have these big hood fans, range hoods there that are like, 200, 300, 400 CFM. Well, you can negatively pressurize that home, which means you're sucking in, again, you got a lot of infiltration as a result. There's some consequences to that. And so some people have this thing called makeup air, which is that you now have a fan pushing air into the home to, positively pressurize to hopefully get to a balanced scenario where you have an equal amount of air being pushed out is being pushed in, and then you have balanced ventilation, and then the air is not going to be unintentionally moving through the walls. It's going to be intentionally moving through ducts. And, I think this is a big one people don't get. You are better off having air moving through a duct intentionally than through your building envelope unintentionally because of what can happen. And I'll touch on that as well.
Okay.
And so there is also this thing called the ERV or HRV. It's shown here in the slide. And essentially you've got air being blown outside, air being sucked in from outside. So 2 ports. You've got air being sucked in, so a return from inside of the home, and then clean air being pushed into the home, being supplied into the home. So you've got 4 ports, and all that air is being exchanged. And so sort of the hot air and the cold air, you can think about passing each other and sort of recovering some of that heat. Or in the case of ERV, enthalpy, or energy recovery ventilator, you're actually rejecting some of the moisture across that membrane in the center, in the core. And so the heat recovery will allow the moisture to pass through. And so in some climate zones, it's better to have an energy ERV than an HRV in terms of just the moisture side of things as well. So, in certain climate zones, this is a good solution. I've heard people say just like everyone should have an ERV. One thing to know about an ERV, especially in the Southeast and humid climates, is that while it does reject some moisture, it is not a dehumidifier.
Yeah, exactly.
And not only is it not a dehumidifier, but it is allowing some humidity to come into the home. And so you can't think of your ventilation strategy as an ERV not creating additional moisture into the home. And you have to be aware that it still may be more moisture than the home can keep up with. And so you may need to pair an ERV with a dehumidifier in the case of that climate zone. When you look at the cost of an ERV and a dehumidifier, you can go with another option called a ventilating dehumidifier, where it passes the ventilation air through the dehumidifier and conditions it before it enters the home. We find that that's a really good solution for that climate zone.
I could definitely see that as a complete class in itself, because that is one of the issues we're starting to see in new construction for sure.
I love ventilating dehumidifiers for the climate zone A because a lot of them have high quality filters. They got the ventilating portion and they're taking care of the moisture. So it's an all-in-one, all 3-pillar solution, and it operates independently of the air conditioner. So it doesn't matter what your set point is. If it's too hot or too cold, it can run.
Completely independent.
I haven't seen that. Mold in the envelope. This is what I just wanted to talk about.
Sure.
Infiltration, exfiltration briefly, is that if you have let's say a hot climate, and you have, let's just say your strategy for ventilation is just pushing air out of the home through your hood fan and bathroom exhaust, you're going to get infiltration. And so when hot, humid air passes through your wall, and then the layer of drywall on the inside of the home is nice and cold because it's in the air conditions and
it's the condition side. Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to get what's known as a dew point below the dew point, or that meets or exceeds the dew point of the outdoor air. So the surface dew point of the drywall is such that it's going to condense that warm, humid air coming in. And that may be happening behind the wall, behind the drywall. And so that's why we get mold, right? Because that moisture, that condensation that can form, that condenses on that surface, it's touching that cold surface. That mold is going to happen behind the wall because there's sitting moisture there. And there's stuff for it to eat. There's some microbes, bacteria there, and it's going to grow and it's going to release mold spores, and you're going to be breathing that in, and it's often hidden. And so you get these sick families, and you open up the wall, and this is what's hiding in the back. And so this is why we don't want just a ton of supply exhaust and ventilation, supply form ventilation. We don't want infiltration. We want either balanced ventilation in the southeast, or we want exfiltration. It's better to be positively pressured and blowing that
pressurizing the structure.
Yeah. The worst thing is sucking it in, just from a building science perspective there.
Sure.
So the last pillar, because I know we're coming up on time here, is humidity control. Much simpler. Why is it related to indoor air quality? Condensation. We talked about the dew point, the relative humidity. There is an effect on health here. There is just a humidity at which it's too dry for a respiratory system. You get coughing, you get static shocks, and there's a human health impact of it being too dry, your skin, etc. But too humid also is an issue. You get things growing, you get insects, etc. You get more, and interesting enough, some of those insects, there's insect feces and dead insects, and you breathe that in, like dust mites. So that's what we know as
absolutely.
Dust mites as well. Mm-hmm. And that people are highly allergic to those insects. So if you can reduce humidity, get rid of those insects, you're actually reducing one of the main human irritants in the air. So, baths, showers, obviously the majority of humidity typically comes from just the climate zone, which is why we talked about the climate zone. But stovetop, cooking, laundry, floods, etc. All right. Yeah, I think we've mostly covered this pillar 3. Just the final thing is we have the solutions of humidifiers and dehumidifiers. Somebody had a question, could it be a portable unit or a whole home unit?
Right.
We typically deal in the whole home style. And that's mostly because it's typically a whole home problem. It's typically not a isolated room by room problem. In some cases, it could be. There are, for example, really good use cases for basements and encapsulated spaces, crawl spaces.
Sure.
But yeah, typically we would recommend dealing more on the whole home scale. Okay, awesome. I see some people are
starting to pop back through here.
Popping back in. So just the 3 pillars, again, filtration, ventilation, humidity control, airflow is the foundation of those pillars. And these were all of the solutions that we covered from all 3 pillars. One of the great solutions we've seen, again, ventilating dehumidifiers, great in climate zone A. One of the, I guess, reasons that indoor air quality isn't accessible to everybody is some of the cost of these solutions in some cases can be high. One of the things that we've been innovating on is using a motorized damper connected to a duct to bring in ventilation air.
Sure.
And one of the reasons that isn't done today, especially in the humid climate zone, is because if you dump a bunch of hot, humid air into the home, you get issues. And so we're adding a layer of intelligence with our controller to say that there are certain times of the day that are demand-based. So either based on the need for the ventilation. So is there a chemical level that we want to mitigate and,
is there
a
certain point that we're going to start conditioning?
Yeah. Is there a reason essentially to be ventilating? And we can measure through monitoring the TVOC levels, that chemical soup. We know we actually want to get rid of that. We want to lower those levels. And so that's when we would say, time to turn on that motorized damper duct. And at the same time, we can kick on the central fan to distribute that ventilation air. And we can make sure that the outdoor conditions, we have certain cutoffs. So if it's, just extremely humid or extremely hot or really dry, really cold, that we're not bringing in, freezing air. And so there's sort of a balance between comfort, health, safety, and even the damage to the home and the equipment. And with that layer of intelligence, we believe that there are lower cost solutions that we can make available that only work because of that layer of intelligence we're adding.
Okay. So we're starting to use more of an intelligent home approach towards indoor air quality, not just looking at a structure going, okay, it's a dry home. You're telling me you have a bloody nose. So we'll add a humidifier and we'll move it around until we find some place that you are comfortable. Now we're actually going to start measuring the quality of our air, and we're going to use controls to be able to mitigate what those solutions are for our indoor home environment.
Yeah, and to Todd's point, it's not like we're geniuses. We're literally just taking existing state of the market in commercial, in industrial, and bringing it to the sort of single family home and residential market. It's just amazing to us that some of this
went this long. It is amazing.
Demand control, ventilation, economizer, like these are just the simple functions we're trying to bring to the market so that people can benefit where we spend the most amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we still have a few people out there. Anyone have any questions while we're going through here? Todd, thanks for jumping back in here with us. So we're not sure what actually happened on that connection issue.
Yeah. I'll just wrap up on my side that monitoring, why would you do it? This is one of the sort of primary things we started off on as a company. The reason you want to monitor is because out of these three pillars, most homeowners don't have the budget out of the gate, at least, to do all three pillars at once.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And they might not even believe that all three pillars need to be addressed. And so really monitoring is just, as a technician, is being able to diagnose if there's a problem, like you would, the TXV is not good. The air conditioner, the Delta T is not, what it should be in terms of performance. Like just how you would troubleshoot any other issue, the monitor allows you to troubleshoot what the indoor air quality problem is, if there is a problem, and then allows you to specifically address that pillar. And so therefore can better fit into the budget and can be better educated and communicated to the homeowner. So you have a higher probability of actually getting the homeowner to understand why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say you can't solve an issue unless we have some kind of measurement, some kind of analysis. And then now we have some data that we can collect and give a true solution. So we can validate what that information is. So we can sort through what our readings are. We can show the homeowner, all right, here is the system performance. Here is the home performance. Now we can look at what our options are. So maybe we work on one piece now, maybe we work on other things. At least we're aware of what the condition actually is instead of just throwing IAQ items out going, okay, I've heard this works good. I'm going to give you a price for this. And by the way, let's just hit it all with this big old bundle. And I think it'll work. And let's just finance it all and we'll just make this thing work. Versus actually taking time, using technology to analyze, give us some inputs so that we can actually have an output that's validated.
Yeah. And one thing to note is that with every season of the year, the air quality issues can change. So the issue you might detect through a monitor in the winter could be totally different from the summer because your windows are closed up or you're starting to use combustion in your furnace or there's seasonal allergies or there's wildfires, right? So different issues happen at different times of the year and you might address things in stages, as you said, as things come up. And it's quite likely that it could be a budget thing or it could just be that it's not topical at that time. And it could also be that the technicians are too busy during the summer to do some of this work. And so a lot of this work tends to get done in the shoulder season and ends up being a great way to keep busy and retain staff during the shoulder seasons. And by the way, Ty Branneman's in the chat. Ty is a legend.
Yeah, absolutely he is.
Honored that you would tune in here, Ty.
Well, cool. That's a lot of stuff. I mean, there are so many things that we can follow through here with Kevin and dive deeper into what these solutions are. I think this is a perfect 101. This is an introduction to why are we looking at IAQ? Why are we looking at the quality of our air? I almost get nervous when people start saying we're going to look at IAQ, because IAQ's got that stigma of, no, this is parts, not understanding that, no, let's talk about the quality of the air. If we change it around, Eugene Silverstein is always saying we analyze something by looking at it backwards, right? We're not looking at the indoor air quality. We're looking at the quality of the air that is indoor, right? If we approach it as, let's talk about the quality of your air and what we can do to improve that, now it has a completely different perspective.
Thanks, Eugene.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Kevin, tell us a little bit about some follow-up resources. I've got some things in here for us too. How can people get a hold of Haven and learn a little bit more about what's going on in your side of the quality air environment?
Yeah, so some of the resources were at Haven IAQ, so the Haven Indoor Air Quality, haveniaq.com. And if you're a professional and you want to check out Haven and how you can bring it to your customers, there's pro.haveniaq.com. You can create an account. You can even get some samples to try out at a discounted price, because we've seen that you need to have that personal experience with the product before you're going to bring it to solve problems for your customers. So those are the two places you can go.
Yeah, it is absolutely on my list. I was planning on doing that for this show and just ended up crazy busy. So I'll add that one on.
That time of year.
It is. It's that time of the year. And I really appreciate those that have joined us today. We know that it's difficult to take time out of your day to join into a program when there's money to be made and work to do. But it's all about becoming better educated with our industry and understanding that there's more to just being a technician than the mechanical scenarios. That we have a lot of air to look at as well. We are in the business of air conditioning. And what is conditioning? Well, it's a lot more than just fixing equipment. All right. Well, I think we're going to call it a wrap. Kevin, we really appreciate you joining us, and I'm looking forward to seeing you, because I'll bet I'll run into you at the 2024 National HVACR Education Conference, which is going to be in Las Vegas again, and get a chance to see some of your equipment in action sometime in the near future, hopefully.
Definitely. Well, Clifton, I so appreciate you having me and being able to talk about what we're passionate doing here at Haven. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you again next week on Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC show. Hopefully we won't have any restream connection issues. Bye everybody.